Hello, welcome back to Schlyde into Sports live on 103.1 FM on WVLP Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Schleier, aka Schlyde, and there was a lot that went on this past weekend. Normally, we talk about college sports and the trickle-down effect with the rules and regulations. We are going to go into a little bit of that today, actually, because there is a new update on the Brendan Sorsby story. And we're also going to talk about some of the playoff results, just like I said we would last week with the Stanley Cup and the NBA Finals, both concluding this past weekend. And we, of course, have to talk about the World Cup. I mean, come on. We cannot go in June without talking about the World Cup, which for the first time is being hosted in 3 different host countries, as all of you guys know in some degree, whether it's just looking on social media and seeing all of the Europeans touring the Western Hemisphere, essentially, and consuming Canadian, American, and Mexican culture. Just a very fun time to be alive on social media. So, yeah, those are the 4 things that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to start off with talking about our 2 new champions, both who got out of a sufficiently long drought for both of their championship cases. I mean, New York, they win the NBA playoffs after 53 years of not winning an NBA playoff championship. I mean, that's huge for them. Carolina Hurricanes, they won the Stanley Cup, and it was the first time they had done that in 20 years. It's been since 2006 since the Carolina Hurricanes won a Stanley Cup. So really huge for both of those teams. One of the big stories, at least when it comes to the NBA, is the New York Knicks and how they were able to win, because New York only led in all 5 of the games by 57 minutes and 3 seconds. And just to put this into a little bit more context here, there are 48 minutes in a singular NBA game. So the Knicks essentially led for 1 game plus 9 minutes. That's it. They only led for that long amount of time. The Spurs led for about 117 minutes. Teams were tied for about 18 minutes. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. The Spurs would always come out super strong in the first quarter, and it got to a point where I believe it was game 4, actually, where the Spurs had a 27-point lead at half. At one point in the second half, they had a 29-point lead. They gave it up. They lost that game. It was the 3rd largest lead in an NBA playoff finals game. And they choked it away. They choked it away. Absolutely insane work by the Knicks. I mean, you even look at the championship game, or the final game, just looking at some of the stats. Jalen Brunson rightfully earned MVP of the stats, of the NBA Finals. He scored 45 out of the 94 points that the Knicks put up in their final game. 45 out of 94. I mean, that's almost half the points that the entire Knicks team put up. Absolutely insane. I mean, if Jalen Brunson did not get the MVP, I don't know what games they were watching if he didn't get the MVP of the series. I mean, seriously, what were they doing if that was the case? I swear that absolutely insane that he was able to do that, especially considering the fact that on some of the points that he was making, he was shooting them over Wemby, whether it was in the paint or outside the arc. Just put on an absolute masterclass of how to be clutch. It was absolutely insane. And the city of New York went absolutely ballistic at the end. Unfortunately, there was a school bus that caught fire, which is very tragic. But I will say, like, New York, the team, pretty likable team. I mean, I really liked Jalen Brunson's reaction at the end of the game, at the end of the game 5, where he was just essentially too stunned to speak. I mean, it was just a very genuine reaction. I feel like nowadays people try to aura farm, or they try to act nonchalant when they win stuff, and it's just, I don't know, it just doesn't hit the same as, a response like Jalen Brunson had in his post-game interview. I mean, it was so real, and it really captured the moment of the Knicks winning the NBA championship, because it had been so long for them to do that. Just absolutely insane for the Knicks. Congratulations to the Knicks. Congratulations to the Carolina Hurricanes for getting it done. So I guess moving on to the Carolina Hurricanes for a quick little second before we go back to the NBA. The Hurricanes in their final game had a shutout win over the Las Vegas Knights, 3-0 in Las Vegas. That was on Sunday, June 14th, so a couple of days ago. But wow, I mean, neither team had shut the other one out in any of these games going into that game 6. And Carolina, they were just able to halt all momentum that the Golden Knights had, if they had any, in game 6. But kind of going back to the NBA now, there's a little bit of a debate online as to Wembanyama and the Spurs' response to the Knicks winning the championship. They did not shake hands in the center court. Now, it has been noted online by several people that this isn't the only time that this has happened from the NBA championships or the NBA playoff finals games. Phoenix did not shake the hands of Milwaukee when they won it, earlier in this decade. So it's not necessarily a new thing, but part of the reason why there was such a big debate sparked online was simply because the Spurs are such a young team, and they didn't really have the leadership on that team to, know how to just go over and shake hands really quick while the Knicks were celebrating. And honestly, I'm not surprised, because the Spurs, they had I think they had the youngest team in the NBA Finals ever. Like, it was the youngest team in the NBA Finals ever, or it was in the top 3 youngest. It was one of the youngest teams to ever play in the NBA Finals in the history of the NBA Finals. So, again, a little bit of a debate online about that. There was also the flagrant calls that, frankly, were not called on Wembanyama. There was actually one on Jalen Brunson where he got into his, shooting space, where he landed on the ground where Jalen Brunson was shooting a three-pointer, and Jalen Brunson he could have gotten seriously injured. I mean, he landed on Wemby's foot, could have easily rolled his ankle or broken his ankle if he landed harder, or if his ankle rolled a certain way. It could have been very severe for the New York Knicks. And honestly, if that did happen, the Spurs probably would have pulled off that 3-1 comeback, because Jalen Brunson was the best player on the court for the Knicks. I think the only other player that you could maybe put up there was Adenumbe, who had some very clutch plays in the first couple of games and really made his presence known a few times, dunking over Wemby, and again, just really clutch plays by him. So I think those are the 2 best players of that series. You could maybe put Cat up there at third, or Karl Anthony Towns. Could also put Josh Hart up there. I mean, the bench for the Knicks also was pretty good, at least in the first 2 games. The last game, a lot of the work was done by Jalen Brunson, though. I don't think that should go unacknowledged by anybody that was watching the NBA Finals. All right, so let's talk about this Brendan Sorsby story, because last week I thought that was over and done, and I kind of went, not even kind of, I just did go on a complete rant about Brendan Sorsby and, him being granted eligibility by a local court to play college football minus 2 games. I believe he had a 2-game suspension at the time, but since then the story just kept erupting, and it just went way up and down. It was absolutely insane. I mean, last week when I was talking about it, at the time, there were Nebraska and Georgia were trying to not schedule Texas Tech. A couple days later, the Big Ten was like, yeah, no, we're not going to be doing that. We're still going to allow teams to schedule Texas Tech if they want to schedule Texas Tech. And then the Big 12 decided to file a lawsuit in a federal court to try and penalize Texas Tech. And they ended up getting that injunction, and Texas Tech and Brendan Sorsby were like, you know what? This is too much trouble. We're just going to, Brendan, just go to the supplemental draft and, we'll figure it out, I guess. But it's kind of crazy that it did end up that way. Don't get me wrong, I'm kind of glad that it did, simply because he should not have been eligible at all to play based on the rules that the NBA or that the NCAA has when it comes to gambling, as well as the fact that he broke a lot of those rules while being under the age of 21. So he not only was breaking NCAA rules, but he was also breaking federal law. So I think that still, even despite the situation heating up, that part still went unacknowledged by everybody. And yeah, as a result, Brendan Sorsby is going to the supplemental draft, as he should have done probably when the whole thing started. If he knew he was going to get caught, he probably should have just gone to the supplemental draft. Or honestly, he was a good enough player to where he probably could have just declared for the NFL draft, and he would have been drafted probably second round, honestly. He was up there in the quarterback rankings. Like, people were talking about him in the same light as Dante Moore, Diego Pavia, Carson Beck. Like, he was up there in the top quarterbacks in last year's class. So I think he would have been drafted really high. So he essentially kind of lost out on money by trying to go to Texas Tech with his gambling problem. So quite unfortunate for Brendan Sorsby on that front, but that's the name of the game. You don't necessarily know what's going to happen in the future. Did Brendan Sorsby think he was going to get caught? Probably not. But a sportsbook snitched on him, essentially, and Texas has very strict gambling laws, and you're not allowed to gamble in the state of Texas. And Brendan Sorsby was trying to go around the law, and it didn't end well. If you're trying to not only go around NCAA regulation, but also state law and federal law, it shows that there is some kind of problem, puts a bigger spotlight on you, and it makes it a lot harder to get away with breaking the NCAA's rules and regulations. So I think something else that I also took from this was that, a lot of people were talking about how extreme the reactions were to gambling, or at least to Brendan Sorsby's offense, which was gambling, right? Texas Tech, their administration was arguing, well, he didn't kill anybody, he didn't do XYZ, and essentially just naming off crimes that are worse than gambling, which I don't really see how that is a justification to why it's okay for him to play football. But that's just beyond me. I mean, it's just essentially you're just trying to point the finger in another direction. Maybe they were trying to point fingers at Georgia because Georgia has had a lot of players getting caught speeding like crazy in residential areas on highways. And that's a whole other thing. I don't know if Texas Tech and their administration was trying to kind of point fingers in that direction because of what happened with, I believe it was Rashee Rice, who had a hit and run when he was on Kansas City. So I don't know if they were kind of leaning towards that. Maybe because these schools, they're kind of petty. I mean, these schools and the administrations, they do like to kind of call each other out. Some a little bit more subtly, some less so. But it does lead to that question, at least in my mind, as to whether or not Texas Tech and the administration is subtly calling out other schools. Now, when it comes to the Big 12 and what they did, so they were able to build a case, and essentially, like, their case was that if Texas Tech lets Brendan Sorsby play college football next year, then it will hurt the reputation of the Big 12 amongst the other conferences, which at this point, they kind of needed to make that case because a lot of people, when they look at the Big 12, they don't really compare the Big 12 to the Big 10 and SEC. Like, some people don't really see the Big 12 as a power conference, which is kind of baffling to me a little bit, but they don't really see the Big 12 as a power conference. Don't quite understand the logic there, but let's just say that the Big 12 doesn't go through with this, Brendan Sorsby plays, schools are able to not schedule Texas Tech, right? Or at least like for out of conference, like schools are not able to schedule Texas Tech. Let's say somehow the schools within the Big 12 that are also upset about what Texas Tech and Brendan Sorsby did, which is kind of allowing this to happen, fighting for Brendan Sorsby to play despite, the blatant disregard for the gambling rules that the NCAA has. Let's just say that all plays out. Let's say essentially Brendan Sorsby is going to be playing next year. That's essentially the scenario. And there would have been a whole thing with vacating the wins and all that stuff, like just trying to figure out the legitness of the season. How is that going to change Texas Tech's record? How is this going to affect the college football playoffs, assuming that Texas Tech makes the college football playoffs if they are in the top 12, if they are a Big 12 conference champion, or a Big 12 conference champion again, I should say, because they did win it last year after all. So it becomes a whole thing, right? And I don't think Texas Tech really wanted to deal with that. I don't think the Big 12 wanted to deal with that. And I think that's part of the reason why last week the scenario played out the way that it did. But I do think it's a good thing because of the way it played out, conferences are now going to have more power when it comes to regulating and punishing their own teams. Which I guess just kind of, how do I put this? It's not too far of a hop and skip away to say that the conferences have more power than the NCAA. Because if the NCAA wasn't able to enforce their own rules with the breaking, with the gambling, right? If they weren't able to enforce their own rules with the suspension and Texas Tech and Brendan Sorsby are able to go to a court. Other athletes and schools are able to just go to a local court and then just get the decision they want. But conferences can go and essentially counter what the college and the athlete are doing to try to protect the reputation of the conference. To me, at least just kind of connecting dots and reaching at straws a little bit here, it's kind of leading me to believe that the conference administrations have more power than the NCAA, just based off the results of the court cases. And the Big 12 was smart to go to a federal court because that, supersedes the local court. It supersedes the smaller court. So, at least I didn't go to law school, so I'm not like the expert on law by any means, but I did take American history in high school. And from what I remember in American history, the federal court supersedes the local and state courts the state courts in some cases, not all. But anyways, that's a bit of a tangent there, but that's besides the point. The point is that the conferences, as of right now, based on the results of the courts, have more power than the NCAA when it comes to enforcing rules and punishments. I do think this is the best case scenario for everybody. If Brendan Sorsby did play, I think it would have tainted this upcoming college football season. It would have given way, way too much power to the athletes and the schools not when it comes to making money necessarily, because I do think the athletes should be paid, not just in college football and college basketball, but in all the sports. Like the money should be better distributed. But when it comes to, going around the rules that the NCAA has that everybody is following, I have a little bit of an issue with them trying to, use the courts to get their way. And that goes with eligibility too. I was not a fan when Diego Pavia was trying to get another year of eligibility because he played JUCO. I wasn't necessarily a fan of Trinidad Chambliss trying to get eligibility because, he was sick for a majority of the season, one of the seasons, and then, they, for some reason, didn't count it. He was trying to get it counted, and, he ended up winning the cases to get eligibility, but it just sets bad precedent. That's one of the things that it does. Absolutely. It sets a really bad precedent for future athletes. The younger generations are going to see what Diego and Trinidad and Brendan and other athletes, like in college basketball. We talked about the one guy from Alabama who was trying to come back, the guy from Louisville as well, who's going to be coming back next year as of right now for college basketball, just because, they go to the courts, they find ways around the NCAA's rules. And it's like, if you do it enough times, everybody's going to be trying to do it even more. That's going to cause anarchy. It's going to cause chaos. And it is ultimately going to lead to the destruction of college sports as a whole. Not even just college football, not just college basketball, not just the two of those, but college sports as a whole is going to go down the drain. It might not exist, at least not in the same way that we know it exists and the way we know it should exist. So it's whole thing. So kind of moving on to talk about the supplemental draft, just to kind of explain how that works a little bit, because that can be a little bit complicated. So essentially, the way a supplemental draft works is It's after the main draft. It's a midsummer alternative draft for players who missed the spring draft filing deadline. So teams submit blind bids using next year's draft picks to secure players. If a team successfully drafts a player, they forfeit that exact same round selection for next spring. So just for the eligibility and circumstances of the supplemental draft. The supplemental draft is not held every year. It only takes place if there are specific prospects approved by the NFL league office. To enter, the player must be out of high school for at least 3 years, which Brendan Sorsby meets that, experience changed circumstances that allow them to unexpectedly lose their college eligibility after the standard spring NFL draft. Brendan Sorsby kind of falls into that category. It sounds like he is leaning more into that category because Texas Tech and Brendan Sorsby are conceding the eligibility. And the third piece is players in this draft generally lost eligibility due to academic issues, NCAA rule violations, or off-field discipline. Brendan Sorsby meets one of those, which is NCAA rule violations. So for the bidding system, unlike the standard draft, which goes in a strict round-by-round order, the supplemental draft operates more like a blind, silent auction. So the first step is making a bid. Interested teams tell the NFL commissioner the exact round they are willing to use to select a player 1st through 7th round. Winning the player is the next step. The team that submits the highest round bid is awarded the player. So essentially, let's just say that Brendan Sorsby is the only player in the supplemental draft. That's unlikely, but in this case, let's just say he's the only player that's in there, right? Let's say that the Eagles put in a 7th round, like a late 7th round bid for Brendan Sorsby. The Titans put in a late 5th round bid for Brendan Sorsby, and the Dolphins put in a early 3rd round bid for Brendan Sorsby. And those are the only 3 teams that put bids up for Brendan Sorsby. Miami would get that bid. They would pick up Brendan Sorsby. But because they bid a early 3rd round pick in the supplemental draft, that means in next year's NFL draft, the Dolphins are not going to have that same early 3rd round pick that they had. So instead of trading with other teams your picks, like trading your picks away, whether it be for a free agent player or what have you, they're giving their pick to the supplemental draft. And next year, that pick is void in the actual draft. So cost of bidding. Teams must weigh the reward of getting a player against the high price tag. If a team wins a player by bidding a 3rd round pick, they forfeit their 3rd round pick in the following year's NFL draft. So that's exactly what I just said. Because the price is so high, many years pass without a single player being selected. So this is going to be one of the few years where we're probably going to see a player get selected in the supplemental draft. I'm genuinely curious to see how high the pick is going to be. If it is a 1st round pick for next year, that would be absolutely insane. I don't think that's probably what's going to happen because next year's draft is very stacked. You're going to have Dante Moore. You're going to have Arch Manning. You're going to have a slew of elite quarterbacks going into this draft class. So I don't think a lot of teams are going to be giving up 1st, 2nd, or 3rd round picks. I think the highest that Brendan Sorsby probably goes in the supplemental draft is 4th. But again, kind of because of the high quantity and quality of quarterbacks that are going to be entering the draft next year, he might not even be selected in the supplemental draft. I mean, he could enter, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee his selection. So that's also something else to consider as well. We might not even see Brendan Sorsby, see a pick. He might not even get selected. But yeah, so the draft order. Unlike the standard draft, the order is a strict reversal of the previous season standings. Supplemental draft order is split into 3 weighted lottery tiers. Tier 1 is teams with 6 or fewer wins from the previous season. Tier 2 is remaining non-playoff teams, and Tier 3 is teams that made the playoffs. The order within these tiers is randomized. So that's pretty much how the supplemental draft works. I really wanted to talk about it simply because I didn't really know a lot about the supplemental draft myself. I don't imagine that a lot of you guys did either, because it's something that does not happen that often. And this is one of those special circumstances where it does happen. Before we talk about the World Cup and the expansion of the World Cup, I have a message from our sponsor.
This broadcast is brought to you by Authentic Impact, a Northwest Indiana executive coaching practice working with family businesses to ensure their legacy. When you started your business, you made a promise to do things differently, better than anyone else. Over time, as the business grows, that promise can get diluted or even lost. Penny Schlyde at Authentic Impact helps family business owners reignite that promise, weaving it into team engagement, performance, and hiring so your passion becomes the heartbeat of your company again. Learn more at authentic-impact-coaching.com.
All right, so now it's time for the World Cup. So, like I said at the beginning of the broadcast, this is the first time that the World Cup is being hosted by 3 host countries. So essentially, it's being hosted by a confederation instead of a country. So this would be the NCACAF or NCONCACAF. It's a really long abbreviation for the confederation for North, Central, and South America. It would just be the CONCACAF, and then South America is the CONMEBOL. Europe is UEFA, I guess, and Africa is CAF. Asia is AFC. That's an abbreviation that a lot of us are pretty familiar with, simply because there's the AFC conference. But anyway, disregarding my completely random point there with the AFC, there was a expansion for the World Cup this year. This is the first time that the World Cup is being expanded from 32 teams to 48 teams. So there are 16 new additions to the World Cup. Part of that is because of the expansion, because since Mexico, United States, and Canada are all 3 hosting, host countries automatically get bids into the World Cup. So, that's 3 spots out of the original 32 that were going to end up being taken simply because there are 3 host countries. Normally, there's only 1. So, that was 2 additional spots that would have had to have been fought over, so they ended up deciding to expand it. Now, there's groups A through L. There's a lot of groups here. So the first group got Mexico, South Korea, Czechia, and South Africa. Group B, you've got Qatar, Canada, what am I blanking right now? Switzerland. I almost said Denmark. I think that's part of the reason why. But they both just remind me of each other. But anyway, there's a lot of groups. So, yeah. United States is in group, I believe it's C, if I'm not mistaken. No, United States is in Group D with Australia, Turkey, and Paraguay. U.S. had a historic victory over Paraguay with a 3-1 victory. It was one of the most dominant victories in the World Cup so far. Not as dominant as Germany's victory, their 7-1 victory over Curacao. And Curacao, this is their first time in the World Cup, and they scored their first ever World Cup goal in that game against Germany, which was pretty huge. It was a pretty contentious first half, but Germany ended up absolutely running away with it in the second half, which honestly doesn't really surprise me too much. One of the things that was surprising, though, was Ivory Coast getting a victory over Ecuador in the, and I kid you not, the last minute of the game, the last minute before they applied the stoppage time. Ivory Coast scores a goal over Ecuador, and Ecuador was dominating in the first half. They were dominating the time of possession, lots of shots on goal, but they just weren't able to get anything in. And Ivory Coast just comes out in the second half. They end up dominating the time of possession, and then in the last minute, they ended up getting a goal. There's 5 minutes of stoppage time, or 6 minutes of stoppage time, but then there was an extra minute added to that stoppage time because Ivory Coast celebrated for an entire minute before they, got back into the gameplay. So, yeah. Japan, Netherlands, they tied 2-2 in Group F. That was a huge game as well. Both teams have hopes for winning a World Cup this year. Japan has been kind of gradually building up their team. Every year they come in and they're better than the year they were before every time. Netherlands has been to the World Cup final 3 times, but has never won a World Cup. So Netherlands is starving for a World Cup victory. And, those two forces ended up clashing in both of their first games, or both of their opening games of the World Cup. So both of them at least got points up on the board. Japan currently is second, according to FIFA's website, and Netherlands is third. Sweden is actually in first with a victory over Tunisia. Something else to note for the World Cup due to the expansion is that you're going to see both Australia and New Zealand participating. Because of the expansion, island countries get an additional spot, and normally Australia and New Zealand fight over that spot, but now they both get a spot. So we're going to be seeing a lot more of Australia and New Zealand in the World Cup in the future. So just to kind of talk a little bit more about, well, actually, before we talk about the expansion, there was one other game that was very surprising. And this game, I don't think this game would have happened if it wasn't for the expansion, actually. So this was Spain versus Cabo Verde. They ended up going into a draw. And Spain was one of the, according to some ranking systems, I believe it was Fox where I saw it, or Fox Sports where I saw it, and Spain was ranked second on their list. They were ranked number 2 on their list, or on their rankings. And they drew to Cabo Verde. Now, this, even though it didn't result in a loss technically, but to a lot of people, this can very well be seen as an upset, because that outcome was not supposed to happen, especially looking at some of these other outcomes like, Sweden over Tunisia, where it's a pretty lopsided win. Germany over Curacao, lopsided win. USA over Paraguay. That was a little bit less suspecting because Paraguay, they played really tough defense against Argentina and Brazil, who are two notoriously well-performing soccer or football, depending on, if you're watching from Europe, but, or I guess really anywhere in the world besides the US. But anyway, Paraguay is actually a really good team. So the fact that USA was able to win 3-1 is kind of insane. So, um, yeah, I mean, this is going to be a really, really fun World Cup to watch, not just because of the expansion. Obviously, you have more groups and everything, but with the fact that it's being hosted by 3 different countries, there's just so much different, like just everybody being in one place, like the World Cup. Like soccer fan bases, they do travel. And just, as a college sports guy, there has been debates online whether or not the college football stadiums are better than the soccer stadiums, and a lot of these debates are brought on by the Europeans. Um, and now they're coming over and witnessing a lot of the essentially culture that is within all of our college stadiums and NFL stadiums, and I guess becoming enlightened is really the only way I can put it, because they're like the ones that do go to the stadiums and are, in the moment of like the War Eagle flying down in Auburn Stadium, or in Jordan Hare Stadium, and the swag surfing tradition and stuff like that, going to Death Valley at LSU, like they're just really taking it all in, and they're like, wow. And that's essentially a lot of their reactions online, which has been really fun to see. It really adds to the debate of, like, I guess, American stadiums and Western stadiums versus European stadiums, because they have been doing a lot of trashing on the American stadiums. Not a huge fan of that, but it is what it is. Like it's hard to appreciate something when you haven't experienced it, But yeah, the way that the schedule has kind of worked out for the World Cup, it's essentially 2 games a week per group. So, like today, and it looks like Tuesday next week will probably be the same as well, with the group letters or numbers, I guess. But no, it'll be almost the same, but there's about 6 days between each group's 2 games. So for today, so Tuesday, we've got 2 games from Group I and 2 games from Group J. Group I and Group J don't play next until Monday. Their next games are not until Monday. So there's a little bit more time in between each of their games. Now, one of the drawbacks that people were pointing out about expanding the World Cup, just like with any playoffs, they're playing more games, which means it's more wear and tear on the individuals' bodies, more likely to be injured, etc. But with the expanded playoffs for, college, even college football, there's about a week and a half in between some of the games for the playoffs. So I think a week in between is a pretty decent amount of time, especially for soccer. They're running around the entire 90, for 2 45-minute halves, plus or minus like 5 minutes of stoppage time. But just kind of factoring in the facts that they're not running around with a lot of equipment on them, like the shoulder pads. They're not running around with the giant helmet on their head, giant knee pads, leg pads. Like, they're not running around with a lot of essentially baggage while they're playing. So there is still a little bit of a concern for wear and tear. It is still very early in the World Cup. Some of these teams haven't even played their first games yet. Just looking at some of the groups, like Group I hasn't played. Group I and J are playing their first games today. Group K and L aren't playing their first games until tomorrow. So there's still time to see whether or not that argument on expansion rings true. I personally am for expansion for the benefits that have been listed, which, I mean, if you look at the benefits, it's kind of a win-win for everybody, because you look at it like financially for FIFA, like they're going to get more money for broadcasting rights, corporate sponsorships, ticket sales in comparison to previous tournament formats. But I mean, that to be honest, that's not really the one that I care too much about. I care more about at least in the case of FIFA and the World Cup, considering the fact that the men's and women's, it appears every 2 years. So in 2028 is when we're going to see the Women's World Cup. So, I mean, it's kind of like the Olympics, where you see that every 2 years, Summer Olympics every 4 years, then 2 years later, it's Winter Olympics and so on. So it gives a little bit more exposure for the sport as a whole outside of the individual professional leagues that are within each different country. There is obviously stuff that happens with the national teams within the federations, but that's not as well known, I guess, at least in comparison to the World Cup. It's just not the same, but that could change with the playoff expansion, because now people, they're going to care a little bit more, especially about those smaller teams like Ivory Coast, Cabo Verde, and Curacao that are setting history for themselves in the World Cup. I mean, Ivory Coast, that was their first ever World Cup victory against Ecuador. That was their first ever World Cup victory ever. I mean, it doesn't get much better than seeing stuff like that and watching, just seeing more teams be exposed in this light of the World Cup, seeing it expand, more teams, just more. I mean, there's just more opportunities for the sport to grow as a whole. And, it being hosted in America and I'm saying America, not just United States, obviously, I'm also talking about Canada and Mexico, like in North America. It's going to bring a lot more attention to the sport. There's going to be more interest from Americans, Canadians, and Mexicans to play in the sport, because they're seeing all of these other countries come in. They're seeing how, they rally around their team. Like we're all influenced by each other. And I think, sometimes seeing a cool like the Orange Army, for example, in Dallas, when the Netherlands was playing Japan, like their fan base is called the Orange Army. They all wear orange. It was just a parade of orange going into that game. I mean, if that doesn't light a fire under you to, get inspired to root for your team, I don't know what will. I mean, just watching the Orange Army roll through Dallas, or technically Fort Worth, but in Dallas, I mean, that was just a really cool thing to see. And it's not something that you see every single day. And I think, being exposed to something like that, I think will help get more people in the United States, in Canada, in Mexico to get more invested in soccer. And that will ultimately help our team, or Canada's team, US's team, and Mexico's team grow in an exponential way. Because, I mean, all three teams are pretty solid right now, but, especially for us, like the US, we're third most populous, I think it's either third or second most populous country in the entire world. Like, the more people you're able to get invested and interested into something with 330 million people in a single country, the more that is going to come out of it. I mean, we have a lot more talent to pull from for soccer. So getting more people interested in playing soccer is going to, like, at least, the younger generations, that is going to help Team USA keep getting better and maintain some kind of success. That's pretty much how I look at the expansion. I think for us, I think it's helpful. For smaller countries, definitely helpful, because it's going to get them more exposure. They're going to get more experience playing in those high-level games, playing the high-level opponents more frequently, which ultimately is going to make all the teams better. I think it's going to make the competition better. I mean, even just comparing it to the NBA playoffs, and I've kind of crapped on the NBA playoffs for expanding the way that they have, where I think only 4 teams or 6 teams don't make it in, which, just thinking about that is a bit ridiculous. But when you look at the playoffs and you see the Knicks go as far as they did, do they go as far as they do without playoff expansion? I don't know. I mean, they were one of the top teams in the NBA already. I mean, same thing with the Spurs. Spurs were ranked number 2 in the Western Conference. Knicks were ranked, I believe it was 3 in the Western Conference. So I think the only teams that were ahead of the Knicks were the Celtics and the Detroit Pistons. But otherwise, it might not have even happened, because, I mean, there are some upsets that happen in the playoffs. Like, if you expand it, it becomes more likely for upsets to happen, at least in those early rounds. Again, going back to the World Cup again, you look at Spain and Cabo Verde, 0-0. Did Cabo Verde win? No. Is this a win for Cabo Verde? Absolutely, because now it applies pressure to Spain to have to perform better against the other 2 teams that they're going to have to end up playing, which is Saudi Arabia and Uruguay. And Uruguay is no slouch. That is for sure. So, again, we'll see how it goes. But yeah, this is going to be a really fun World Cup to watch. There's still so much World Cup left that we're going to be watching as well. I mean, today's slate is going to be really fun with who's playing today. Where'd it go? Sorry, I scrolled way too far. I mean, you've got France and Senegal playing. I think that'll probably end up being a lopsided game. Iraq, Norway, that will probably also be a lopsided game. But, I mean, after those games, I don't know if it's next week or the following week, but Norway and France are going to be playing at some point. Those are 2 teams that people are really getting behind as possible World Cup champions. So when Norway and France play in their group play, that is going to be an electric game to watch. We also have Argentina, Algeria. I think that will probably end up being a lopsided match because, again, like I said about Argentina before, they have a lot of history of success in the World Cup. I think Austria versus Jordan could end up being a very interesting one. I mean, I don't really know a lot about Austria and Jordan in terms of World Cup history, so maybe Jordan ends up getting the victory over Austria, but that's pretty fun one to watch. England, Croatia, I think that one will be a very sneaky game. Croatia is a very sneaky team in the World Cup. Portugal, Congo, that one should be lopsided. Got Ghana, Panama. I think that one will be interesting. I don't really think either of those 2 teams will probably make it out of the group play. Whoever wins this match will probably end up making it out of group play, but I could see both of them not making it out. Then you've got Uzbekistan, Colombia. Those are tomorrow's games. And those are all the first set of games for Group L, Group K, Group J, and Group I. Then we go back up to the top on Thursday with Group A and B. Friday, we've got Groups C and D playing, which USA-Australia, that is going to be a really fun one to watch just because of the styles of play that both of those two teams have. Very different from each other. Australia, very defensive focused. They counterattack. USA, they're more, they like to attack on the front. So Australia's side of the field is going to be very stacked up. There's going to be a lot of players over there. I think Scotland, Morocco will also be a very interesting one. If you guys don't remember from the Qatar World Cup, Morocco did make it to the semifinals last year. So Morocco could be a team that sneaks up on everybody. So I'd keep an eye on that game. I mean, I don't really know how good Scotland's team is. I'm pretty sure they won their first game. I mean, they are at the top of the standings, but in Group C, Morocco and Scotland are sitting on top in Group C. Scotland at number 1, Morocco at number 2. So that is going to be a really electric game to watch. You got Brazil at 3 and Haiti at 4. So that battle for the 2 spot and 1 spot is going to be a really interesting battle between Scotland, Morocco, and Brazil. And with that is all that we have time for today. Today was a really fun day, like just talking about World Cup. I mean, it's, like I said before, it's something that we only really get to talk about every couple of years. Hopefully that will change when, as a result of the expansion, hopefully we see more upsets to kind of lead into more talks next year and the year after when, there is no men's World Cup. Then we see what happens when the Women's World Cup plays out with I think theirs is getting expanded as well. But just seeing how the expansion is playing out, that is going to be really fun to follow. Kind of glad that the Brendan Sorsby story is over. Like, we don't have to talk about that anymore because Texas Tech and them conceded. So we're not going to be talking about that next week. Next week probably going to be heavy on World Cup and heavy on MLB. If there is anything on the rules and regulations that does end up coming up, like a Brendan Sorsby story, we will be talking about that for sure. If there's anything else that you guys would like me to talk about, I am on social media. You can send me a text on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok. Just search up Schlyde into Sports and you'll find it. You can also send an email at schlydeIntosports@gmail.com if you want anything specific to be talked about on the broadcast. If you want to go back and listen to previous broadcasts and leave a comment on what I should talk about next, you can always go to the YouTube, the Patreon, Spotify, Millions.co, and other podcasting platforms. Again, like if you leave a comment there, I can look at it and then I can bring it up on next week's broadcast. But yeah, next week's broadcast, baseball for sure, and World Cup. And if there's anything else, please either leave a comment or send me an email or a text, and I will bring it up on the broadcast. 1,000%. But again, it's YouTube, Spotify, Millions.co, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Patreon, all the other podcasting platforms. If you search up Schlyde into Sports, you will find it. The logo is white and it has the WVOP logo on the left side, kind of the bottom left, not left corner, but left side. And it has 3 sports on there. Also, the merch. I did say that there's going to be merch coming. It's not going to be this week, but it is going to be coming out next week. So keep an eye on that. The merch is going to be on millions.co's website. I will put a link in the description next week. That being said, I'll see you guys all next week. Schlyde out.